Here are 13 signs that you were raised and or you are or were or had a highly toxic parent. Now, I've heard a lot of conversation around using the words toxic, and Patrick Teahan just fully embraces it. And at least what I've seen, recently. And I have to say, there aren't any other great words. I don't sometimes love emotional immaturity because I feel like it sometimes minimizes significant patterns like narcissism and untreated borderline and or autism, ADHD. And not that those labels help, but for me, when I could say my mom has something like untreated and undiagnosed borderline, it helped me with some narcissistic flavor, which is often common. It helped me stop blaming myself. And it gave me a way to sort of conceptualize where she struggled and why. And it also helped me realize when I tried everything that there was no coming back from this, that she was never going to get better and it got worse. And so toxic makes us sick. That's the bottom line. In fact, you could even call these parents chronic stress giving, therefore trauma giving parents, essentially, because they put you in a state of chronic stress. And we know that chronic stress creates the heart of trauma, that really those chemicals awash in our brain and our nervous systems and our bodies. And that is what makes us sick. So it is important. And I'll say one more time that most parents, if not all, make mistakes, don't get it right, don't always apologize perfectly, but there's a very big difference between those of us who are working to be better parents and know that we're not perfect, and the parents who just sort of go through life with blinders like this. They have no interest in self-awareness or self-development or growth. Nothing is ever their fault, and that is when it becomes toxic, and that is where it is so much harder to identify when you live in a state of like everyone's owning their parts and like accepting trauma. And these parents are like, I didn't give you trauma and I'm not owning it. As I've said a lot, my mom, I heard this somewhere. It was like, my mom would say, I was a good mother. You're just a bad daughter. And I think that is very telling. All right. So what do toxic parents do? Let's go through 13 things toxic parents do. Number one, they are abusive. And they are abusive in ways that include mental, physical, and psychological abuse, certainly other forms of abuse that involve our bodies, that they do things like they're critical, they call you names, they neglect you and don't take care of you. Neglect is still abuse. It's just the absence of doing anything, the invisibility of that is what makes it so difficult to identify. It is still abusive and harmful to not have your emotional and physical and mental needs taken care of. So they engage in forms of harm, period. And you can look up in Google, I even have a free course on identifying childhood trauma. If you're not sure, was that actually abusive? Check out my courses, I'll link down below. The second thing they do is they are controlling and manipulative. And they do this through being, harsh with their punishment, through being punitive, excessive, restrictive, overreactive. They gaslight you and tell you that what you feel and what your reality is not true. They might twist reality and make their kids doubt, like, is this really what happened or what's happening? They actively gaslight you and tell you that what you feel, what you need, what you experience isn't really happening. And it might even be told to you that it's your fault that it's happening. They manipulate you. They use guilt and shame and all kinds of tactics to control their child's separate self, their child's access to privacy. They don't respect boundaries in that regard in terms of their actions. They will manipulate the entire dynamic to serve them. They don't hold the child as a separate self. So that's the bottom line. The next thing is they don't manage their big feelings well at all. They are explosive, or they give you the silent treatment and shut you out. They're dramatic. They might blow on you, yell and scream and rage. They are often very sensitive to any perception that they are doing parenting wrong. And so they will come at you. You are not allowed to have a separate view about how they parent you or what they do. They can make you literally walk on eggshells and be provocative at all times. So you are constantly holding your breath and you never know what to expect. That is the root of chronic stress, which makes us sick. The literal fight or flight response and walking around literally on your tippy toes, never knowing if they're going to do any or all of these things, is the root, that hypervigilant root of so much of our trauma, because we have to live in a survival state. There is no such thing as living in a state of seeking connection. Connection is not safe. It's all about survival. The next thing is they are self-focused. They are narcissistic, or they have narcissistic tendencies. They center themselves. They lack good self-awareness. They will put their needs and their desires over their child's. Their desire to go on trips and leave you with someone unsafe or alone. Their desire to buy or do or feel or experience things that don't take you into account. They can often be jealous of their children's success. They don't want their children to shine. But as an example, if they're narcissistic, you are a reflection of them. You're an appendage, but make me look good, but don't look better than I do in that regard. So there's just like this very self-focused behavior that does not take you into account. And it just plays out in a lot of self-centered behavior. The next thing is they don't generally have empathy. They're not empathic and supportive. They don't tend to affirm you and, like I said, validate you and see you as separate. If they do apologize, it's sort of manipulative or to make themselves look or feel better. It's not an actual reciprocal apology that is intentional to make you feel better and to own behavior. They can be constantly critical and kind of just be negative all of the time and just trample on your happiness or joy. Or they will say, yeah, that's great. But then it's always a, yeah, but you got that right. Yeah, but. So all you ever hear is what you didn't get right. They're pointing out how you are too sensitive. You're a crybaby. You're too emotional. You overthink things. What's wrong with you? They don't understand and have the ability and want to engage empathically with who you are. And in that regard, their children are often just burdens to them. They're just getting through parenting in that regard. The next thing is they don't take responsibility. They blame other people. They don't know how to make repairs and say, you know what, I got this wrong. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to, but I know that I hurt you. Tell me how to make it right. They have this I'm always right mentality. So they just don't own and take accountability for, often in childhood, but even in adulthood. As a quick aside, it's very different to say my parents were like not great in childhood, but in adulthood, they were so much better. They apologized. They made it right. They're great grandparents. That's wonderful. It still sucks that you had that bad part in childhood. But many of us have parents who just continued the tour. They never got better. They never got nicer. In fact, for me, as an example, when I chose a family, my mom perceived it as me abandoning her. And it got so much worse with my marriage and with every baby, and I have 4 of them, they're not babies anymore, with every single one I had. But when I was in it, it was all I ever knew. It was toxic, AF, but it was all I ever knew. And so it took me, literally, I've said I was in a doctoral program before I really understood. I didn't have other siblings, other family. There was no one else. So it was just me, right? And in that regard, we're always going to put that attachment over ourselves to survive. I can't admit that mommy's a bad mommy because where does that leave me? Unsafe and alone. Even in adulthood, who wants to be abandoned as an adult and choose not to be with a parent? We do that out of survival when we do it. The next thing is just constant boundary. Number 7, boundary violations. So your things, how they speak to you, how they engage with you. And that connects to number 8, enmeshment and parentification, where they make you the caretaker. You have to rotate around them and their feelings. Their big world of feelings spill over into your world again and again and again. And it becomes a thing where you feel like that's your fault and your responsibility. Number 9, they don't let you separate. And this all kind of goes together, but they don't let you be a separate self. You are always a reflection of their brokenness, their projections, their hopes, their dreams, their losses, their pathology, whatever it is. You are not seen as separate. Number 10, they're highly inconsistent. This is toxic. When you have good mommy today and bad mommy tomorrow, and you never know what to expect, that is walking on eggshells. That is what it looks like to live in a state of chronic fear and anxiety, toxic stress, and hypervigilance. Number 11, they prioritize their partner. They prioritize the co-parent, or they enable the bad parents' behavior. So they choose your step parent over you. They behave inappropriately. They go through lots of relationships. They don't take you into account. Let's say if they're single and bringing partners over, they don't prioritize you. They prioritize the other adults in their life in some way. Often they're romantic partners. Number 12, and this is not about poverty, but there is an intentional disregard for taking care of their children. They won't take the job that's beneath them, and so their kids suffer. They consistently make bad choices through their financial, inconsistencies, so much so that it creates a lot of instability for you. And I'm not talking about hardworking people in this country and all across the world who don't have enough to survive, because that is just reality. I'm talking about parents who intentionally prioritize other things over them when they could provide stability for their children. And number 13, things like addiction and untreated mental health issues and mental illness, that it's just and this is hard because we understand that when you're in those things, you don't necessarily know how to get out of them. But when a parent, let's say leaves the kids with the addicted parent but doesn't want to take them, or the addicted parent knows they're struggling and it's harming their children, and for whatever reason doesn't or can't get help, it is still toxic, even with compassion for understanding those things, because it's not easy to fix those things and get support for either one of those things. But those things often go with all these other things. When a parent has addiction to mental health issues, they're often trying to fight their own demons every day. And that can make it really difficult to be aware of what your children are doing, to take care of them, to set boundaries, to identify unhealthy people in their life. It just can. It doesn't mean that it always will, but these things can go together and make all of it really toxic for children. So those are 13 signs of what it can look like. Any one sign in and of itself, there can be lots of reasons for it, and compassion and understanding and empathy. But usually these things go in a cluster, and that's important. And lastly, I will say this: parenting is the hardest job on the planet. It really is. And so I'm not sharing these things to say you have to do it perfectly or anywhere near right, because God knows I haven't. And I don't know anyone who has. But I know that there's a difference between parents who, like I'm saying, the difference is this. They don't evolve. They don't change. They get more rigid, more harsh, more in denial about their behaviors. And I say it all the time, I don't get it. To me, I understand the brain part, but as you get older, to me, you should become more loving, more open, more accepting, less rigid of everyone. But a lot of these parents actually go the opposite. They become more harsh, more judgmental, more critical, more shut down, more narrow-minded. And if you've been a toxic parent and you're doing that, my guess is you probably don't have a good relationship with your adult children. Just saying. So, it takes a lot of willingness to be flexible and open and inconvenient sometimes as parents, right? To put your kids first, to remain beside them, to own your mistakes, and to accept that you don't need to be perfect, but you do need to try to be open, loving, consistent, and safe. So that's it. Thank you so much for being here. Please stay safe and well, and don't forget to love on yourselves. And I don't know that I have any good sage advice. I just filmed my second video today, except to say that a lot of us are walking around wounded and doing our best. And so maybe just today, just remind yourself when someone is acting like a jerk or they cut you off that you never really know someone's story. You really don't. Just like they don't know your story. So maybe instead of letting yourself blow, reminding yourself to just take a breath, and remind yourself that, I tell myself this all the time, this sounds crazy, but maybe their mom died this morning. Maybe she was a great mom or whatever. That sounds morbid. But the point is, you never know what someone is experiencing, and letting yourself get completely jacked up by it, like in the car, for example, is probably not going to serve you the rest of your day. So give yourself a break if you do. Try to ground yourself and come back. But remember that we really are, all of us, good and toxic parents. Most of us are doing the best we can. It's just that some people are not really trying at all and don't care to try. And that is where I think it gets, a little more difficult to understand. Anyway, have a lovely day. I'll see you soon. Take care. Bye.